Does that mean it won't record?
It will. All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first stream on Rise of the Phoenix 3D. So today we are joined by William and Sean from Med Dimensions. So these guys have taken 3D printing into the veterinary sciences, which is really cool, and it's out in the world. And I'm going to bring them in, and I want you guys to make sure that, give these guys some applause in the chat here, and definitely want to make sure that thank yous, because I do appreciate these guys coming on with their company. They took 3D printing, similar to what you guys see me do in my basement, and took it into a business and into the medical field of veterinary medicine, which is really an awesome thing. So let me bring them in. And so we've got William and we've got Sean. First off, and one thing too, this is Megan. You guys have seen her in some of the videos. She's my wife. She's also a veterinarian.
Do you want me to introduce kind of how I met them? So I was fortunate enough, I got to go to a Veterinary Innovation Summit conference. So being a veterinarian, I ran into, I think it was Will, at a booth that he had at this summit. And of course, had a background of 3D printing myself with my husband at home. So struck up a connection, and there we are here today with both the co-founders of Med Dimensions, Will and Sean. So thank you again for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
So Mike, do you want to just quickly introduce yourself, and then for our mixed audience, because we're probably going to have some veterinarians viewing as well, as curious to see the evolving technology in our field, but also for Mike, your audience who are 3D printing at home.
Yep. I'm Mike. Rise of the Phoenix 3D is the company that I run. We're a small, just basically education-based 3D printing company of anybody that wants to get started 3D printing in their home. And it's kind of one of those cool things, because I know Sean and William, you guys started off the same way that I'm basically started off, of just a printer, don't really know what to do with it, and built from there. So that's kind of one of the exciting things that makes this really interesting, is how we can, a simple purchase of a little machine and a little bit of elbow grease, knowledge, and tinkering can actually come into something very large. So I really kind of want you guys to kind of just tell us the story of how you actually got started.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having us on, for letting us tell our story. But Will and I met. We both went to the Rochester Institute of Technology. We were studying biomedical engineering, and we met on Will's first day. I'm a year ahead of Will. And I was talking about an experience that I had over the previous summer, where I worked a little bit in a 3D printing lab, did some volunteering, and just kind of picked up some of the basics. Will was super into 3D printing, approached me, and we ended up working together in the lab for a foundation called Enable, which I'll let Will talk about a little bit first. From there, we started a club at RIT called Bioprint. Basically, what we did is we took on different projects to educate other students about 3D printing, and then also to help animals and help humans. So we did some assistive devices, things like prosthetics for dogs, or we helped a gentleman that couldn't golf due to deformities. We built a device to help him golf. So we did some different projects like that. Eventually, we had a project that kind of spun off and turned into Med Dimensions. But I'd like Will to talk a little bit about Enable, the foundation that we started working with.
Sure. Thanks, Sean. There's a lot of names that I have to go through, and frankly, I just won't be able to get through them all. But this all, as Sean said, it started my first day. When I was choosing colleges, I really didn't know where I wanted to go, what I wanted to do, but I knew it was prosthetics. I 100% knew there was nothing else I ever could have done, or so I thought. So that really started off the college experience. I was hunting around for programs that seemed to have good opportunities to advance in the world of both designing but also actually making prosthesis. And one happy coincidence led to another. And I think it was my 5th day on campus, I was in a 3D printed prosthetics lab. Couldn't have been happier if I tried. And that was enabling the future. It's a relatively big organization, decentralized. So you'll see a lot of little pop-ups on different universities or different places around the world. But the ultimate goal is to use 3D printing to provide functional prosthesis for no cost to recipients. So for individuals who don't have anything, who can't get anything, or for especially younger individuals who are going to continuously grow out of their prosthetics, Enabling the Future has a repository of, boy, I don't even know anymore. It's probably half a dozen to a dozen 3D printed designs and for different types of amputations that volunteers make and they donate, which is everything that I wanted to do. And of course, as Sean said, we tried to take that a little bit into the realm of prosthesis for animals. And then the first project that Sean was alluding to was a veterinary a veterinary surgeon reached out to the head of our department and said, "Hey, I got a bone that's really, really, really deformed, and I don't really know what I want to do for the surgery. Can you 3D print it?" He came to us and said, "Can you do it?" And we went, "Yeah, absolutely. We totally know how to do that." And this is what manifested. So this is the very first bone that we ever printed. It was an option for the surgeon actually was marking it, cutting it before he walked into the surgery. We sent him in with a few full-size bones here, and it's kind of really where it all started, where it all blossomed from, was a really happy accident into a ton of 3D printing day in and day out.
Yeah. Well, and kudos for that veterinarian to really think outside the box and look into, different options. So that's really neat.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Now, you said you took the bone and you made a 3D print of it. How did you even take the image of the bone and turn it into that 3D print?
Sure. Sean, I'll have to let you speak a little to this.
Awesome. So a CT scan, which is done often in the human field, it's often to look at bones or different types of organs. It's also done in the veterinary field. And with that data, we were able to essentially extract the specific bone and then create a digital 3D model, which we were then able to print. There's a variety of different softwares that you can use to do this. We used one called 3D Slicer, and that's kind of how we started. And basically by extracting that data, you can create that physical bone that represents like the animal's exact bone, which is really cool.
And one of the things I know, Sean, when we've talked before, you're not just limited to the bones. You actually can do organs as well, with using similar flexible filaments like TPU and different things like that. I think before it was a trachea that you were showing.
I have that with me, but basically what we were able to do is when we isolate the specific anatomy, we can do bones, we can do soft tissues, and then we used to 3D print everything in hard plastic PLA, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, but that didn't really represent the kidneys or portions of the airway very well. So we moved to TPU, things like Ninja Flex, as well as creating molds that we can insert silicone into to create that flexible type of model. And that's kind of how we've been able to do some airway, working on doing some almost like some full chest models for different types of procedures. And that's how we got into that type of work.
So you started with a lab, but I also know you kind of did some of the stuff with the college and the clubs. How did that kind of grow and blossom from the labs?
Yeah. So unfortunately the lab ended up shutting down, or some of the people that ran the lab ended up opening up different labs, but it wasn't open to as many volunteers, and it was very selective. And we had a lot of people that when we told them about our experience, actually kind of designing and printing hands for different types of people that didn't have the resources. A lot of it was children, where as they're growing, they're not going to get a fully fitted prosthetic every year. And a lot of people heard about this and they were like, oh, like we'd love to, work on these types of things. So we ended up starting a club. We went up to our department head and we were like, hey, we have some interest. We have some pretty cool technology. Can we start a club? And that's kind of where it came. Bioprint started. We reached out to everybody that we could in the area. Does anybody need help with printing? We had 3 or 4 different projects. I'd love Will to talk a little bit about Golfer Gary, which was probably one of our more significant projects. So let's see from that.
Wow, we're going way back in time now. So this Golfer Gary, I think, was started our second year as an official club. And Gary had spent his entire life playing golf, and without getting too far into the details, a few operations and a few medical concerns later, he had lost the majority of his digits, both feet and hands. And the story that was originally presented to us was from one of the original lab founders who had this gentleman. They connected us, and boy, there was so much to happen from there. But the long story short, in not being able to really hold the golf club well, Gary had wedged the handle of the golf club in between a brace and his arm, and that was not functional for a variety of reasons. Certainly the safety concerns, the fact that it fell out, but it also it changed all the dynamics of the actual swing, so on and so forth. So, relatively speaking, new club, kind of trying to figure out how we can operate within human healthcare. This was a really great example. It wasn't really a prosthetic. There was a ton of interest because there was a ton of golfers at RIT, but also just in the club. And what we ended up developing, and as a matter of fact, to this day, I still keep in touch with Gary. We continue to design towards something that would allow a variety of different clubs to be used. So non-standardized sets or handles with different diameters. It would allow you to change the position of the face of the club. So it was I guess you could call it a gear-like design. And the end goal was to find a way, or for really a student club to ideate how it's possible to use 3D printing and a little bit of, I won't call it magic, but a little bit of engineering to develop something that is functional for an individual with a disability that plays you don't think about it, but it's a really high force sport. All the torque that's experienced from the club, and how do you make sure that it's not going to break? Because if it breaks, somebody's going to get hurt. And that's, geez, I don't even know anymore. This is probably three years worth of work, and we're still making minor modifications as we go. But the end result was a brace, an adapter, and pieces that fit on the golf club that actually allowed Gary to golf again. And that was, I think for me, that was the last nail in the coffin to decide that we needed to find a way that 3D printing could be used to help people and pets. And here we are now doing something pretty close to that.
I'm also curious, you talked about like all the things that kind of went into that project.
Mm-hmm.
So who are the students that were attracted to this club? Because I can imagine you could have students who are interested in medicine, engineering, all sorts of things. So can you kind of describe the diversity of the people who are kind of working all together on this?
Sure. I think Sean and I were very fortunate to realize and to be pointed early on that it didn't have to be just students from our major. Frankly, it shouldn't be either. The diversity of experience was going to be really important there. So we had, again, we're dusting off cobwebs here, but we had biomedical engineers, we had mechanical engineers, biomedical sciences. I believe we had a few, I don't want to botch this major, but medical illustrationists, and I guess there's other ones, of course, that I'm gonna miss, but it was very diverse, and we intentionally made it so that we would get as many different students on the project as possible. And frankly, that was really fortunate because we had some students who had a ton of golf experience that may not have had the engineering experience, and we had a few other students who had a ton of design experience but didn't understand the kinematics behind golfing. So that was fortunately a really nice coalescence of talent and of students that helped bring this project to fruition. But I'll say with the 100% certainty, if it wasn't for that blend, that project would not have gone the way that it did. It was the multiple experiences, the multiple opinions, and the multiple expertises that really brought that project through to a state of again continued development, but something functional.
Yeah. So
that brings me to the question, and I'm looking at this. What made you shift to the veterinary world? What drove that shift? Because right now, what you've described is human prosthetics.
Mhm.
What made you make the shift over to the veterinary side?
So I'm going to let Sean speak a little more to the medical side of it, but I'll speak from my personal experience. I grew up doing animal rescue. It's everything that I've ever done. And biomedical engineering initially was supposed to be that way between blending medicine, like mom's a nurse, dad's a doctor. So I grew up in a medical family, and engineering, which is what I really loved. I loved to tinker. So for me, it was a pretty logical progression to realize that 3D printing in healthcare was the next step. And when Sean started to say, "Yeah, I'm thinking about vet school," that was really the kicker that we needed to go into that space. I think another really important part that's not said enough, or at least not said loud enough, is human healthcare usually gets all the cool innovations. So for us to be able to bring something new and innovative to veterinary medicine was really important. And I think of that, I'll let Sean kind of tell the story from his side.
Yeah, of course. So I definitely had interest in the veterinary field. I had decided, very similar to when we started the club, that I was going to pursue veterinary school after my undergraduate degree. And so that kind of pushed me to look for potential projects that involved animals and, how we could help. That moment in the operating room that Will had mentioned before, where we were working with that surgeon in the bone, it really started to make me think, like, why isn't this available for everybody? And could we do that? So that's kind of where the business idea towards the veterinary field really came about. And with my personal interests in veterinary school and stuff like that, it really was just a great mix. And we found that working with veterinarians is an awesome experience. Everybody's very, very appreciative of the help and wants to work with you, and they often have time to do that. So that was, some of the projects that we took on with animals were awesome. We made a prosthetic for a chicken. We made a couple of prosthetics for different dogs, and tried to make a cart for another. So it was really, really cool projects that we had to think out of the box. And, there weren't really solutions. On the human side, there are definitely some solutions here and there. So it was a really cool opportunity for us.
So how did it progress into being an actual business, from club to entrepreneur in the business world?
Yeah, so it was a really long journey. Fortunately, RIT has a lot of entrepreneurship programs, and we had a couple of our friends that pushed us to just go take one of the classes. And you have this idea, go take a class and see where it goes. So we showed up into the class very overwhelmed with all business students, and it was 2 engineers. We really didn't know what we were doing. And on the first day, we'd heard about another big 3D printing company, and I remember we were terrified because, like, oh my God, like somebody else is gonna, take over. We don't have anything, but we pushed through it, and we ended up building on that class. We then took an accelerator. We then did some other programs, and we started to see that there really was something there. There was a market to help animals and to build a really cool company. And through the different accelerators and programs, we officially listed as a business, and started producing, started actually doing prototyping, started working with other veterinarians. Very soon in that journey, I started at Cornell, now in my second year. So we started working with them and other universities and other companies, and then that's kind of how it built slowly. So we do 2 different sides of veterinary field. We work a lot with education, which is awesome because, Mike, you do a lot of education as well. And that's something that's really important to us. And now that I'm a student too, I'm really seeing how the resources that are available to students as well as, clinicians and residents are very important. So we do a lot of models to teach, whether it's learning anatomy, whether it's trying a new procedure, whether it's just practicing, making sure your skills are good enough. And then we also work on the surgical side, similar to those bones before, where surgeons can look at the anatomy before they actually have to do a procedure. So they're more comfortable, they're better prepared. And then we also do some more advanced tools, the tools that actually go on during the operation to help with specific cuts and specific planes and stuff like that, as well as some work with implants. So that's kind of how we mix the 2.
So we started a business. You got a bunch of great minds together, but the journey to actually starting 3D printing. And I know it was the club environment, but what really piqued your interest in wanting to even try a 3D print?
Yeah, good question.
Yeah, so for me, this is an interesting one. My mom had seen some video about 3D printing, was always pushing me towards it. I was like, no, Mom, like I have no idea what I'm doing. I can't do that. And then I ended up getting the opportunity in the lab. And the first time I printed, I was like, wow, like I'm creating something from nothing. And that feeling of being able to just build something out of thin air, essentially, it just really hooked me. And then after that, I just wanted to do more and learn more. I bought my own printer. I bought a couple of printers. I met Will, who had printers too. We started buying more printers. But that's kind of, for me, that's how it started. My mom pushed me to do it. I was like, I'll give it a try. It ended up being one of the coolest things I've ever done.
Now, it's one of those things, getting more printers, it's not an addiction, it's a necessity.
I was going to say, this is starting to sound really familiar.
Will, I'm kind of curious to hear your story of what got you to do that first 3D print.
Well, this is going back to high school. This was even pre the days of RIT in college. I was struggling to know what I wanted to do. There's no other way to sugarcoat it. I had a bunch of different options before me. I guess I was 16 at the time. As any 16-year-old probably remembers, you weren't listening to anything your parents said. Yet you had to figure out your life. And that posed kind of a hard question. I didn't really know what interested me. I had loved biology. In high school, I had like 1,100 gallons worth of fish tanks full of all sorts of critters. And all of a sudden, there was a weird little white box in my physics lab one year. And that was a Ultimaker 3D printer. And nobody was allowed to touch it. And then there was one student who was allowed to touch it. And eventually I just started poking and prodding and asking, well, what is it? And how do you do it? And where do you go from here? It was probably 2.5 months after that, or a month and a half before the end of the school year. And I saw an article on the news about, as a matter of fact, I think it was Enabling the Future, about a local student who had 3D printed a prosthetic hand. And for some reason, it just clicked. I don't know if it was something about the article. I don't know if it was just the coalescence of all the right factors that day, but I knew I wanted to try it. So enough begging, late nights, and luck. My physics teacher said, "Don't tell anybody else. Go ahead and print something." And it failed. It failed miserably. I had no idea what I was doing, but that was the exact moment I knew. I knew 3D printing was, at the time, it was something that was the coolest thing in the world. I had no idea how it worked, but it's the coolest thing in the world. And I could actually do something with that. I could see a future of making 3D printed prosthetics, and I was sure that would be the rest of my life. And one thing led to another, and I ended up at RIT, and this was probably my 9th day at this point on campus. And one of the engineers that worked in the lab took me over to another Ultimaker, which I'd never seen. I never worked with this particular style, and said, "It's broken. Fix it and make something." And that is a name I am going to drop. Skip Meets, Kodak engineer. And that was the exact moment that 3D printing was solidified. Figuring out how the printer worked by a little bit trial by fire, but also having that same realization as Sean, anything in my head, anything, as long as I could design it, I could make it, there was no looking back. And I still have the little trinkets. Actually, this was the very first little thing that I printed. Nothing major, just a little cable tie out of TPU. But that was it. I knew that one way or another, I was going to have 3D printing in my life. And sure enough, now you kind of see we figured out how to make that a business.
Yeah. So I'm kind of curious. So, from high school 3D printer to you are now making prosthetics and all sorts of amazing things for your business. what about these printers? Because I think some people might have in their mind, these elaborate, fancy printers, but what kind of printers are you using to do these things?
So we started off with the first printer that I had was a Prusa i3 MK2, which might not mean a lot to everybody, but it was considered one of the higher grade entry-level 3D printers in 2000, and I guess that would be 2017 when I got mine. And we've always kind of run with Prusas. We find that they make pretty decent quality. I mean, what's one of the good ones? So this is a really tiny little cat skull.
Oh,
and it's surprisingly good quality for a desktop 3D printer. That being said, we've diversified from there. There was let me see if I can find it. I believe Sean had actually printed this one, and this is on a Creality CR10. So this is one of the TPU materials of the larynx. We've explored a bunch of other different technologies. So this is off of a Formlabs 3D printer, which is a resin-based printer for some of the more flexibles that we just quite couldn't get out of FDM style. Same thing out of the Formlabs, some bronchi. And where is the last one? And then as Sean was also speaking to previously, some of the cutting guides that we've made. So this is, I have to hold it because it's not pinned in place, but this is made on an FDM, and this little cutting guide is resin and made on a Formlabs printer. So general categories, it's not crazy industrial systems. It's not a $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 system. And sure, I work with those, and they're fantastic. Do they fail? Very rarely. Are they fast? Oh, yeah. But it's a $50,000 3D printer. I'm still able to produce some crazy models with nothing more than $1,000, sub $1,000. Realities are $300.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that CR10 is probably, when it was bought, was probably about a $500 printer, I bet.
400, yeah.
Yeah.
It was the cheapest thing I could find, and that's how I got started. I was like, this looks like it can work. A good community, which I thought was really important because I had a lot of questions. Obviously, came already constructed. Yeah, that was a great printer to start with.
Yeah, because I'm Creality for the most part. There are a couple non-Creality machines in my shop, but the CR10 is the center point. There's 5 of them in my shop downstairs, including the CR10 Max, which I will be honest, I've gotten that machine and I fell in love. Because people that have followed the channel here, I make some very large projects, and that printer has been a blessing in disguise. But also, I know the manufacturing side takes place here too. Basically, rapid and duplication of prints. Do you guys have anything like the conveyor belt printer, like the CR30, where it's the endless Z and it can produce the same model over and over? Have you guys gone to that level of manufacture, or is it still more of individual style projects based on the veterinarian or the prosthetic need?
Yeah, more custom projects.
A lot of what we do right now is custom projects. We definitely have looked into the conveyor belt type printers so that we can do more, let's say, overnight and things like that. But typically we work on like a case-by-case basis for printing. And then if we're doing, more interactive models that have multiple components, then we'll use either like silicones or we'll try and do some molding as well to speed up the process. I mean, one of the most interesting things that we found recently is that when you're trying to create the same object many times, depending on the geometry, 3D printing a mold can be a very good option to do it as well. And then you use either a resin and you let it cure, or you use some sort of silicone, and it's great. You get basically the same quality that you would do printing, but it's repeatable. Obviously, it doesn't work with every type of geometry, but using 3D printing in different ways is also really cool.
I guess the one thing I'll add to that, part of we're talking more business here, right? But part of the strategy for somebody who's getting into 3D printing is figuring out what you want to do. And thus far, we've kind of found that, like Sean was saying, custom one-off here and there is a lot more what we do. But the airway is actually a great example of that. So we're pretty close to having the finalized model for this. And once we do, the benefit of an automated system then really starts to come into play. And that's kind of the next generation for Med Dimensions as a whole, is automating as much as we can. And there's a lot that goes into that. There's the financial ramifications of that. There's the time savings ramifications. But I think when you're first starting out, that's not necessarily how far you have to go, unless you determine that, yeah, you're just going to do the same part over and over again. So one of the recent projects that I'll kind of give a sneak behind the curtain here. So rib model. On top of the ribs, we end up layering silicones, which are super, super, super stretchy. And they're meant to actually replicate the skin. So this is an example that it would have been great for us to have a more automated system. We made, technically speaking, 6 models. So it's 6 halves of the rib cage. We ended up making the molds for that. And I would start it at 10 o'clock at night. And when I came back in the next day, usually around noon, it would either be done after a couple hours, or it would still have a couple more hours to go. So that's a deciding point for us to say, yeah, we definitely need to automate more of this. We need to get production systems to just crank parts out. That's also not to say that there aren't things on the horizon. Prusa just announced a brand new system that's allowing full automation of a farm, if you will. Mm-hmm. There's certainly the opportunity to print a ton of parts at the same time and get really smart about scheduling so that it finishes at a time where an operator or you as an individual can go and pop those parts off, start something new. It really is about understanding when you need to make that switch. And at least for us thus far, we haven't necessarily had a reason to do that. And granted, now we're kind of at the stage where that is starting to change.
So here comes the fun question. And Will, I'm going to start with you.
Okay.
What advice would you give to someone that's either just getting started or is thinking about getting started in 3D printing?
It's a question that I asked when I first started, and there was 2 answers that really stuck with me. And the first one is, you need to try it, and you need to realize that there is no such thing as a failure with 3D printing. If it doesn't work, it's an opportunity to figure out how to make it work. I think we're getting better, but still, like an 80% success rate on 3D printers is stellar. Mm-hmm. It's fantastic, and you can't get dissuaded from that. If you're doing something where it's really critical that you always have success, you figure out ways to get around that. But when you're first starting, you can't be dissuaded by something that failed. We had so many hours of modifying profiles, of modifying settings, of changing how we were printing designs to get them working, and it's paid off. It really has. And the second one that I would give is, don't give in to the idea that you need to have a $5,000 printer to make perfect parts. There are very low-cost printers that are great for introducing you to how to actually print, and it's a stepping stone, because a slightly cheaper 3D printer is going to push you to learn how to make that printer better to give you better prints. So after a while, when you have a little more money, you have a little more time, and you can get that bigger, fancier printer, you have a much more robust understanding of how 3D printers work and how you can kind of, you can get the output that you actually want from a model, from a material, and from a project.
So before we hop over to Sean for the same question, I'm going to ask, what is the printer that you recommend for someone just getting started?
This is another one that kills me. I love to say Prusa. I love to say Prusa any day of the week. I think it's a fantastic printer, but there's a cost burden there.
Yep.
Having worked with Creality, I think the CR10 is another fantastic machine. And I even think, to a degree, Annette makes decent 3D printers. The kind of out of left field that really, really surprised me was the Ender series. I think Ender 3 is the one that I have the most experience with, and it's been a fantastic little printer. It's not a lot of money, can't build huge parts, but a couple modifications, and I have seen things that rival what we're able to print on Prusas.
Yep. Ender 3 is where I started with my stuff. So before we kick over to Sean, I'll tell you guys my favorite beginner printer is actually the Focus Odin 5. It's a foldable, storable printer. It is the same size as the Ender 3. They run up a little bit more money than the Ender 3, but 4 bolts, plug in a couple cables, level your bed, you're ready to rock and roll. And what's really cool about that one is it is a direct drive printer, pre-built.
Nice.
So unlike the Ender 3, where you have the external extruder, you actually can go straight to using these cool materials like TPU and different things like that, where Enders and Crealities do require a lot of the modifications. So it is a really cool one to look into. It does have a little bit higher price point, but they run about an average of $250 to $300. So Sean, we're going to kick over to you here, and same questions.
So I'd say my advice is to be patient when starting. I think that a lot of people right now, when they hear 3D printing, they think it's like you touch a button and then something's printed immediately. They don't realize, one, how long it takes and how often it fails. And I think it can be, if you jump into it with that type of an attitude, you'll be disappointed. And I do think that's one of the reasons that, I know you've mentioned a couple of times that there's a bunch of printers on Facebook Marketplace because people don't have time or don't realize how hard it is. So I think it's important to do a little bit of research beforehand. Make sure you know the basics. I mean, YouTube channels such as yours give the good basics, give some general understanding of printing, what to expect, that there will be some layer lines on models that are FDM printed. When you don't want layer lines, well, your printer might cost thousands and thousands of dollars, different things like that. And despite the layer lines, there's ways to fix it. Sanding, post-processing and stuff like that. You wouldn't know if you don't look it up or if you don't do your research. So I'd say you got to be patient and do your research. And then, once you've done that, then find a local printer. You don't have to buy one right away. You can, libraries have them, schools have them now. I wouldn't rush into a purchase before you're ready and you've decided whether you like it or not, because that's the other thing is it is a time commitment. It is a skill that needs to be built on. So you might try it out and it might not be for you. You might just like having the output, and that's totally fine. And you can work with a friend or work with a company that can print it for you, that type of stuff.
So here's a fun question, and this is always my one of my funniest questions. What was your most favorite fail?
Oh boy, a couple of times I've woken up to what I call like the blob.
Yes.
Those are always fun. Those are always fun because basically you have to take the entire printer apart. So yeah, that would be probably my biggest printing fail and biggest moment. But yeah, because it's it just gets all over the printer. You have to try and heat it up and take it off and stuff like that. I think that would be the most significant print fail that I've gotten, and one pretty recently too.
Yeah,
which I was disappointed.
They tend to happen more when that cold weather comes in, and you're just like, oh, because cold temperatures do affect it. So, Will, I'm going to ask you the same question. What was your favorite fail?
If you haven't figured out by now, I'm really a storyteller, so I'm going to try and keep this really short. This model, this is actually one of our members who was kind enough to fall off the roof and break their hip for us to practice. Not a good way of saying it, but nonetheless, they were very committed to the cause, might be the better way. So there's other pieces of this. This is the pelvis and a couple of the vertebra. I made a horrible mistake very early on in my printing career to not figure out how the settings are stored. And when I say that, I mean it's stored under the actual application. And if you don't save it anywhere else, when Windows does what Windows does and you need to reset it, they're gone. They're gone entirely. I was also not aware early on that you could actually look in the files to pull back all those settings. That was a very sad discovery after 3.5 days of redeveloping the profiles and the settings just to get one of these printed. So
at least you didn't have to ask the guy to go fall off a ladder again.
Oh, you're very right. You're very right. We've asked him to stop. Actually, that would be good. But no, that was probably my biggest fail. Was a failure to realize that you need to be proactive to make sure that you don't lose those settings. And now that we actually understand that, I have gone so far as to get a couple buddies who are in IT to help me make sure that there are always backups of those settings, because that was really not kidding. That was 3 days of about 3 hours of sleep a night trying to get these working again.
Oh, that sounds like a nightmare. Because yes, I even have my core Kira settings stored elsewhere, just in the event that computers crash.
Yep.
Mike's IT background has come in handy with a couple of.
There is a lot of redundancy of setting saving. Stuff is on the server, not on my workstation. But
Smart.
I'm gonna hop into a fail that actually Megan made me giggle, because it lives here on her desk.
Oh yeah.
That I had the regrettable, the print fails and it fell and turned into spaghetti. But what did I hear Megan's? It was sitting on the table. I took a picture for Instagram because I post fails out there. And Megan, you said something quite unique about this one.
Yes. So I said, don't throw it away. It looks like a big protein molecule. So hello, veterinary nerds on the. I said, I'll keep it and I'll use it for teaching.
So even a fail becomes something great.
You never know. You never know. Those are the ones actually I think are funny to come in and find the spaghetti all over the floor. I think those.
Yep.
And she gets up way before I do.
I catch them often in the morning.
She sees this before I do, and I'll usually hear before you go downstairs, I hear the warning that, something's failed.
Oh, no.
But it's kind of one of those things. Here comes kind of a shot question here. What is your favorite tool in 3D printing, whether software or tools for the printers, like post-finishing or anything? What is your favorite tool to use? Will, I'm going to kick this one to you first.
That is a really good one. If memory holds, I think it's a 8mm socket, because you don't realize, and actually, I guess you can't see the burns anymore, but you don't realize how many times you can burn yourself taking nozzles out when you clog them. That 90 degrees Celsius, still really hot. 200 degrees Celsius, a lot different story. So either a screwdriver, or I ended up buying just a mini little ratchet with a socket to take nozzles out. Oh, the fingers are so much happier.
I remember I switched over to one of the deep channel sockets just so I could get up there and not burn myself.
Yep.
Because I've done that myself. So definitely that's an awesome one, because I hate burning my hands on the printer. Sean, what's your favorite tool in 3D printing?
I think I'm gonna have to go with software. I really like Mesh Mixer. I think it's a great tool. Often if I download something online that somebody else made and I need to make a couple adjustments or something, there's so many different tools that you can do in there. We use it a ton to smooth different surfaces and make it look better. And I just think that, depending on the object you're trying to print, that if you go and check it over in Mesh Mixer and make sure it looks good, change it a little bit, you can often get a lot better print quality too. Which I think
one of the wonderful things about Mesh Mixer too is, keep in mind, it's free.
Yeah.
For anyone to use, which is really awesome that AutoCAD, because AutoCAD now owns Mesh Mixer.
Yeah.
It's really cool that they kept it as a free product. There was talk there for a little while of it becoming a paid product, but they have decided to keep it free for now. So, which is really awesome. And of course, there's Fusion 360, which is an awesome CAD program for personal use. It's free. So if you're just getting interested in wanting to design models, that is a great platform to start with too. My favorite tool. So I'm going to post finishing. It's one of those things. When I first started, I would go in with the X-Acto knife, heat it up, and try to cut off the parts. I don't know how many times I nicked my hands. Drove me nuts. And then I found this tool. This goes over to my miniature hobby with Warhammer. It's from Citadel. It's called a mold line remover. And this thing, you can take it across the plastic and it will act exactly like the knife, but I can take it against my hand and run it down my hand, and it will not cut me. It is actually just a straight edge, which is really cool for scraping off those ends of a print or any of the spider webbing that sometimes happens with a print. It works really well. And for a $25 tool, I really like it versus using the X-Acto knife. Because that's the one thing, my hands make my money. So I don't like walking around with Band-Aids looking like I've been a wrestler all day or something. So that is it. While it's not directly connected to my 3D printer, it is part of the finishing process that I've learned over time. This is kind of just a tip that I do is sometimes I will take, I've stolen one of her hair dryers, and I will take her hair dryer and I will heat up the end of the tool so it will actually move through the PLA and stuff a lot easier versus hitting it cold, because the heat is actually transferring to the plastic, allowing it to actually mold itself too. So it's kind of a neat way to take care of your projects. So it's always kind of a cool thing to work with. So and we are kind of getting close in on time here. So I have one more question I want to ask both of you, and then we'll kind of go from there. And Sean, I'm going to start with you. How to inspire people to get interested in 3D printing? What is your recommended thought to help inspire them?
I would say find something that you like, and you'll probably be able to print it. That's, if you like, you mentioned liking Star Trek, liking those kinds of things, you can print them. I'm a big Marvel fan. I printed a Thor hammer for Halloween. As part of I think that, if you want to get into it or you want to be inspired, just find something that you're passionate about, and it's pretty easy to find a way to transfer it over to printing and bring your passions to life, which is really cool.
Will, I'm going to ask you the same question. What are your thoughts?
I have a pretty similar answer to Sean, but I actually like to delineate this a little more based on the age of who you're trying to get interested. I think for students, especially, having that same idea for Sean of find something you like and let's figure out how to print it is a really good place to start, because it gets that enthusiasm going. And the instant the creative juices start flowing, that's when you can do a little more of the trial by fire of now figure out how to make it in a design software, a CAD software, and then figure out how to 3D print it. But I think for individuals who are just, not to say older in life, but are students later in their educational career who might find the novelty cool, but might also have functional uses for it, find something that's an inconvenience and make something for that.
It's a good one.
So that's what I started with. This little cable tie was because my headphones constantly were getting tangled in my pocket, and I was sick of it. So I made a little cable tie for it. Behind my monitor, my cables were an absolute mess. So I made a little loops that you would nest all your cables in for cable management. The novelty switched from just being able to make something to being able to make something functional, and that was really important for my continued use of 3D printers. Was not just cool, but also functional for day-to-day uses.
Well, that's one of the things too. Pulling your 3D printing into, I hear this a lot of people say, well, I have so many hobbies. Well, that's awesome. 3D printing can help you in your hobby. This is how I got my father started in 3D printing, was fishing lures. He was going to Bass Pro Shop and spending $8 or $9 for these lures. And I said, you can print them for like 40 cents. And I had a little monoprice printer at the time. And needless to say, it made its way to Rolla. And my dad started to print some fishing lures with it. And the next thing I know, he's got an Ender 3, then he's got a CR10.
It's contagious.
It is. After one printer, you tend to get more once you really get into it. And you guys both are kind of backing me up, but that I'm not weird, and that's what happens. But it is one of those things. It does tie into anything that you can tie 3D printing into anything you do. You're a car guy, awesome. You can print things for the inside of your car. I don't recommend putting it in your motor, but don't do a brake job don't print your brakes. That's a bad idea. But also 3D printing is not limited to just plastics anymore. we're moving into the metal realm. We have carbon fiber available to us in the plastic realm. I think it was just in Amsterdam. They just 3D printed a bridge completely in metal and installed in place. But we're also not limited to that. 3D printing is moving into our food, where they're actually, I presented this to our local library here, 3D printed steak, completely plant-based. And the reviews on it are actually really good. I'm kind of sitting there going, I'm not paying $100 to get that for me to have to cook it. But the theory with it, with what it's using in long-term travel and different things like that, of even space travel, is becoming more of less science fiction and more actual science, which is really cool. I mean, they had a breakdown on the space station, Freedom, and it took them 3 hours to send them the file for the wrench, but they printed the tool right there and went out and fixed it. So 3D printing is not limited to just something cool in your home that you're making models. This is actually becoming large-scale production material in the world. And seeing it coming into the medical sciences is just awesome. Not even just with prosthetics, but education. And I'm a little weird to say eventually, possibly, instead of them having to form a knee joint, that eventually we'll start seeing 3D printing cartilage replacement with possible TPU type materials. Who knows where this can go?
Well, I mean, since we have some experts here, where do you see 3D printing going in the medical, but especially the veterinary medical space?
Yeah, I think it's going to be about personalizing medicine to the pet. That's what I really think should happen and what I think can happen. So, when you're, especially on the surgical side, when you're doing a surgery, well, you're using devices that are made specifically for the pet. I mean, you look at just like dogs, like a Chihuahua versus a Great Dane. It's crazy the size difference. Like, they use very similar types of implants and stuff like that, but they're not shaped the same. They're not the same size. So I really think it's going to be about, personalized implants, personalized tools during surgery. But it's just going to keep going, further and further. I can see prosthetics getting really, really popular. I've already seen it start to pop up in some different ways as well for, animals that have 3 legs or animals that have a partial limb,
I guess I bring a slightly different perspective to the table because I worked in a industrial manufacturing place that also did 3D printing, and there was not necessarily by choice. It was necessity that these two were together. So additive manufacturing and subtractive manufacturing is one. And name drop, Harbeck Manufacturing. Check them out. They do a lot of really good literature on how you can blend the two of those technologies together. But 3 things that we have seen very, very clearly in the last couple of years is, as Sean was saying, is personalized medicine. More importantly, it's prototyping. It's low-cost prototyping that's functional. We make metal parts that are 99% dense. Like that's the closest you're ever going to get to traditional machining, but you don't have to print or make thousands of them. You can print one, test it, modify it, go again. So I think it'll influence the design cycle really substantially. And the other area that we're now starting to see a lot of literature on is how you can change the texturing of these implants so that they actually function better. So there's a bunch of different companies, bunch of big name, bunch of small name, who are doing what's referred to as osteointegrative patterns on that surface. So it's a almost trabecular-like structure, really, really zitty, but bone loves to grow into it. Osteoblasts have a much higher rate of deposition, and it's making implants that were not at all possible to manufacture possible. And now we're actually seeing a much higher efficacy of those implants in use. So I think for the medical world as a whole, we'll never fully switch away from the traditional means of mass manufacturing. I think it's a cost necessity to not do that. But I think what we are going to see a much, much, much higher prevalence of is parts that are additively manufactured because of the benefits you just can't get from other manufacturing types and prototyping. That's prototyping above all else is huge. You don't have to invest thousands of dollars anymore. Now you get your part, you can trial it, you run it through FDA trials, and you're a lot closer to your goal for commercialization than what you ever were before with traditional means.
Well, who is your target audience? So who would want to work with you guys?
Well, I think it's there's a big answer. The big answer is everybody.
Everybody,
There's
good.
a realistic answer, right? So the realistic answer for us is today we're operating within the veterinary space. So that's a huge focus on education, because we think that's a really, really, really great area to do those custom teaching models for lower costs than what you've had before. The next step, or I should say the area that we're operating in, but it's a market that continues to grow, is medical devices. So like we kind of showcased here, some next generation tools for the operating room. We're also in the process of developing some next generation implants. So this is anybody who's freshly out of their schooling. Maybe that's a resident who wants to learn a procedure. Maybe it's a clinician who has a tough case coming up and wants to prepare. And the other reality for us is as long as we're able to continue to support the veterinary space and we're able to continue to demonstrate that this technology works, it's a logical transition for us to see if there's a potential for us to operate in the human space. The frank reality is that doesn't happen today, because the community of veterinarians, of vet techs, of vet students is very welcoming, and that's where we feel the biggest need is. And once we're satisfied with our ability to address those needs, we'll open it up for other opportunities within human healthcare.
That's fantastic. So what's the best way to learn more about you and potentially reach out and contact you?
Sean, I'll let you take that.
Awesome. So basically on all social media, we're Med Space Dimensions. So Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and then our website is med-dimensions.com. But we'd be more than happy to give out our contact information to anybody that's interested in learning more or finding out how they can get involved more in like animal 3D printing and things like that. So if anybody reaches out to you guys and wants to, we'd be more than happy to share that as well.
Fantastic.
Awesome. Now, right now too, you guys are actually looking to expand your team, right? At the time of the making of this video, of this stream, you guys are actually looking for an additional engineer.
Yeah, tell us who do you want to add to your team?
Yeah, so we're just looking to add basically some sort of an engineer that can do a lot of different types of work. Someone that has some experience with 3D printing would be great. Design, maybe some experience with manufacturing, molding. Basically, Will has just moved to full time and he needs some help in the lab. So looking to have somebody to just basically get involved in as much as possible and take on some projects.
Awesome.
Well, congratulations. That's a big deal when you expand your team. So
yeah, we're glad to see that you guys are seeing the growth, and definitely in this hard time, being able to grow is awesome. So all right. Well, again, Sean, Will, Med Dimensions, I appreciate you guys joining us tonight. If anybody is interested in the contact information, this stream is going out on YouTube as a video next. We'll have that information down in the description below. And if you guys liked what you saw tonight or interested, make sure you guys hit the subscribe button, join the channel. And if you guys are interested in seeing more of this kind of stuff where we explore 3D printing in the sciences or in the world around us today, definitely leave that comment down below and hit that like button and let us know that you guys enjoyed this content. Will, Sean, I appreciate you guys coming on tonight. I know we took an hour of your time, but it is greatly appreciated. What you guys are doing is just awesome, especially coming in the veterinary world, medical world. Just what you guys were doing, trying just to help people, is just an awesome thing. And I want to make sure that you guys know I greatly appreciate that. And I very much respect what you guys are doing.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having us on. Honestly, this is awesome. I'd love to just talk about printing in general. And, if we can inspire anybody, in of your following to pursue this type of work too, it's even better. So we really appreciate you having us on. Thank you.
All right, thank you guys, and we'll see you guys next time.
Have a good night.
Thanks.